Today I'd like to invite you to take a look at Psalm 77. You can read it in its entirety. It's 20 verses long. Psalm 77 is what's known as a lament. About a third of the Psalms in our Bible are laments. They are the blues, musically, if you will, of people saying to God, "Come on, help me out here. Why is life so hard?" And Psalm 77 is a prayer for deliverance from personal trouble. And it starts, "I cry aloud to God, that he may hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord." And that's how the psalm starts. It's a lament. But if you look at verses 11 to 15, especially, to encourage himself, the psalmist recalls God's mighty works in the past. And that's what I want to highlight for us today. That when we are going through a time of trouble, when, as the psalmist says, I moan and my spirit faints, when we're feeling weak and hopeless and burdened, and when we're wondering, as the psalmist does in verse 7, will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? That's when it's important to remember God's works of old, to remember God's wonders of old. And for you and I personally, yes, that means remembering the stories in the Bible and the great things that God did for Israel and through Jesus and the early church. But it's also looking at Christian history and how God continued to move, and in your life and my life, being able to remember, when did God show up in your life in significant ways? If you've never done it, an interesting exercise is to create a timeline for yourself from birth to whatever age you are now, and to try to mark on that timeline. You can put every 10 years on it, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, etc. And was there anything significant that happened from birth to 10 years old? From when you were 11 to when you were 20, from when you were 21 to 30? Were there significant moments in your life when God showed up in a way that you still remember, or when you took a significant step forward in your relationship with God or in your spiritual journey? It could be things like a particular Sunday school teacher, or an experience you had as a youth in a youth group, or going to a Christian camp or on a retreat. It could have been in college or in the military and a chaplain who guided you, or being a part of a church, or going to an evangelism event or something like that. But I encourage you to think about creating a timeline, and even if you only try to come up with half a dozen or maybe even 10 significant markers on your spiritual journey when God showed up in your life in a significant way, being able to look back at God's deeds in the past in your life can be very helpful in giving you hope and sustaining you when you're in the midst of a desert or a dark night of the soul. God, who did wonders for you before, still loves you and can still reconnect with you in the present. Sometimes it requires waiting. Sometimes, like Psalm 77, it's crying aloud to God in prayer and reminding us the God who was with us in the past will be with us again in the present.